This is Twit.
2 days ago, in 2015, a little something we call Windows 10 was born.
Kids, let me tell you about the past.
The good old days. 4 years seems a long time, but it doesn't seem... I mean, it feels like Windows 10's been with us forever.
It does.
Yeah, especially if you install all the updates.
Yeah.
I think the reason this is... Well, there's many reasons this is notable, right? But typically, Windows is on a 3-year cycle, you know? And so we've kind of exploded past that here.
Well, remember when they came out with this, Microsoft said this is the last version of Windows. Is that still... I and others might have been a slight bit skeptical.
Yep.
But it's they've held true to that. Is that still the plan?
Yeah, unless you count Windows Lite, right? Which is going to be Windows underneath, but not really Windows from a perception standpoint.
It's Windows 10.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's still Windows 10.
It's the last version of Windows, asterisk.
Yep.
We all knew there was an asterisk. We just didn't know what it meant or where it would be.
Yep.
You know, it's funny, though, this week, because of the anniversary, I've been going back and looking at coverage I did like from 2014 when we first found out about the codename Threshold and how we were being dribbled, like just like it is now, dribbled out little bits and pieces that we were trying to patch together to figure out what they were going to do. Because they didn't tell us right away about the Windows as a service thing, right?
That's right.
I mean,
in fact, you remember it might have been that January trip in 2015.
It was. Yep.
When you and I were kind of escorted out the back door, and we asked the person we were with, because Terry had said, we're going to keep this thing updated, and we asked them about that. Remember? And it was so confusing back then.
It was.
because
it was really confusing. It was super confusing.
Why would that be confusing? Except that they skipped 9.
Well, they skipped 9 originally. So when we knew the Threshold code name, everybody referred to it as Threshold, which is probably going to be called Windows 9. That's how we referred to it.
Okay, well that could be confusing.
Yeah, and then they skipped 9 and went to 10. But when they did that, they already knew that they were going to do this Windows as a service thing, where there'd be regular feature updates that would come originally 3 times a year.
Right.
That was the plan.
Right.
And but they didn't tell us that right away. They just said to us, we don't want to be on this every 3-year train like we've been in the past, and we want to get updates
every 4-month train.
Right. So we're going to do something a little different, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So why not just drop the 10 and just call it Windows?
Right.
A lot of people thought they would do that too. Yep.
And I would even put it. A lot of people thought and probably still think that they should do that.
Because if you call it 10, it implies there'll be something later.
It kind of does, right?
That's right. But
isn't Apple doing that? Isn't Apple going to do that now, right?
Well, they did Mac OS 10 hit. It was the sequel to Mac OS 9. It was or 8 or whatever the version was at the time. But they, of course, it was completely different code base. And the question was, well, what happens when is 11 coming? Yeah. And they never did that. It was 10.1, 10.2, and they called them by these names like Cheetah and Panther and whatever. Isn't it bizarre that Microsoft this late in the game is still kind of copying what Apple did, right? I mean, they took the same name, they took the same. Apple never updated it 3 times a year, but the same kind of incrementalness that Apple always did with Mac OS 10 pretty effectively, but. Of course, they were only upgrading the system once a year.
So really, I mean, Apple's never said this is the last Mac OS. They've never said that. There could be an OS 11.
But
Microsoft, it makes sense for Microsoft to say this is it. And the only reason I ask is because as Windows 7 goes out of life in January, what I've been telling people is, this is the good news. You won't ever have to do this again.
Okay. Well,
the idea being if you go to Windows 10, you will now just get freely updated. You're not going to have this end of life issue as long as you do these updates.
Except actually you will. And that's and that's the problem. So, in Mary Jo, in your notes, let me just kind of read how you wrote this because it's kind of interesting. You said, what surprised us, what Microsoft didn't do during the past 4 years, the best and the worst, One of the things that I would put in the worst is something that I think a lot of people don't really think that much about, which is that when Microsoft had a 10-year life cycle for Windows and other products, it was understood. It's 10 years. It's exact. You may or may not get new features after a couple of years, right? There would be a service pack back in the day, sometimes some number of service packs, but we understood what the support life cycle was. It was very clear cut. And the problem with Windows 10 is it becomes very unclear. It is very vague, and it is actually unknown because your hardware may include a chipset of some kind, your computer that is, that will now not be supported by some version of Windows 10 in the future. It's not going to happen in 10 years. It could happen in 6 years. It could happen in 12 years. You have no idea. But there'll be something, and this has already happened, by the way, already has happened. Was that thunder?
That's
us.
The
thunder. Yep. Thunder and lightning, very, very frightening.
Maybe someone else remembers the details of this, but this has already happened, right? There are people with particular Intel or AMD or whatever chipsets where they had upgraded to Windows 10, to the second version of Windows 10, the third version, whatever it was, and then some version came and nope, we no longer support that thing anymore.
Yeah. That's going to piss people off.
Right.
Yeah. Even remember when they announced it, they had this vague thing that they included in the list of parameters where they said, as long as, I forget the exact wording, but as long as the device is supported. And we were like, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah. That's right. It's supported for the lifetime of the device.
Right.
So what does that mean?
That was
there is no meaning to that. The meaning is kind of what I just said, that there could be a component that maybe, just like this Intel chipset vulnerability stuff that came out a couple of years ago, the Meltdown Inspector stuff. Whereas they suddenly say, hey, you know what? These older chipsets have this new problem that we didn't know about, but now we do. We're going to support it on the very latest version of whatever, but we're not going to do it for those processors. And that's how you're going to find out. And I think the unknowability of it is the problem. It's the exact opposite, I think, of what most people are looking for. It's certainly the exact opposite of what companies are looking for.
So what will it look like? I have a processor no longer supported. Microsoft will say, okay, here comes 2109 or whatever it is. Right. You're not going to be able to install that. Although, actually, I should say that's happened already. There are people who, for driver reasons or whatever, couldn't go to 1809 or 1903, and they're being told, oh, bad news, 1803 is out of life soon.
So what does it look like? What it looks like is for some amount of time, you will get security updates, right? Because while that version of Windows 10 is supported, and how long that version of Windows 10 is supported is going to depend on whether you're an individual or a company, and if you're a company, whether you're on some kind of a long-term support plan or whatever. And so it could be 6 months, it could be a year, 2 years, it could be several years actually if you're a company. But again, it's, in the past, we could say very clearly, look, Windows 7 is supported for 10 years. Done. Here's the date. You know about it when you bought it.
Here's why I think it'll bother people. They'll have to buy a new computer. That's the only fix. It used to be, with Windows 7 going at end of life, you can buy Windows 10, and it'll probably run. But now there's no option. If you're either going to run insecure or buy new hardware. That's kind of a significant thing.
It's funny. That's not that funny, but I spent many hours in the car today, and for some reason, because I am who I am, this thing actually just was running through my head. And so instead of talking to my wife, I thought about Windows Support Service lifecycle.
Wow.
You have a faraway look in your eyes.
Listen, I'm an exciting person.
What are you thinking about? Penny for your thoughts, Paul.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Stephanie. Let me tell you something about Windows XP. No, what I was thinking was, depending on the age of a machine, in the past, when you had to buy a new computer, you were pretty much guaranteed that the machine was, in fact, pretty old. And you can usually make some kind of an argument that the newer version or versions of Windows support, new hardware features that your old thing didn't and so forth and whatever. There was some good justification for it. I think the problem here is going to be there will be instances where a computer is perfectly capable of running Windows 10 and a high level of its features very well, but arbitrarily, perhaps because of a security vulnerability in a microprocessor or whatever, Microsoft and or Intel or whatever will decide we're not supporting this anymore. And you get to the point that the problem I think for people is going to be, but my computer works fine.
Right. That is.
But my computer works fine.
What are you talking about? It's all fine. It's fast enough. It's working.
Yeah, it's like the bring out your dead thing. It's like he's not quite dead, but no, he's dead. Put him in the cart.